We are onto the final section of Pompeii and Herculaneum. This dot point is for changing interpretations. So we're covering new methods of approach to research and also new technologies, which has led to how our knowledge of Pompeii and Herculaneum has actually changed over time. So it's not just simply about, oh, we found something and it's just the same. We are consistently finding new things that challenge what we once thought. So if I'm going to wrap up things pretty straightforward here, if we're to try and sum it up, in the early days, we're essentially the people working at the site are trying to either treasure hunt, get as much as they can, or they're trying to, for prestige and fame about being, getting famous for what they found at Pompeii as opposed to treating the site properly. And it's not until Giuseppe gets there that we also get a bit of professionalism and academic kind of, treatment of the site, and that essentially, shapes those that follow afterwards. Even people like Maiuri and Spinazzola, they're definitely not perfect, but it was an improvement of those that had followed or had come before then. We've got Fausto Zevi, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. He becomes a director in 1977, and even then he kind of really says, the site is very much in danger. And he does some pretty, big shifts. He doesn't allow any more large-scale excavations, and all of the resources are then put into documenting and restorative programs. So, in a nutshell, we move from, focusing on the excavation to more conservation and restoration and even documentation. So the other thing is it's not just about treasure hunting. It's not just about the archaeology anymore. The archaeology has almost become multidisciplinary. And what I mean by that is working at the site of Pompeii and Herculaneum is more than just archaeologists. You have seismologists, you have volcanologists, you have botanists, you have anthropologists, and that's only a couple of how many different disciplines are actually working in the field. And that's not even really talking about the people that are, responsible for the technology and stuff like that. And obviously, the more technology we have has also changed how we work with the sites. So, when we're talking about newer pieces of research, guys, we're essentially talking from the late 70s and 1980s onwards. Okay, so don't equate people like Giuseppe and Maiuri to our later research. They're your early archaeologists, okay? So when I said documentation before, documentation projects are things like photographing what we've got, categorizing, archiving, essentially like organizing what we've already got. So things like your Pompeii Forum project, things like your Via dell'Abbondanza project and your Philodemus project, they are essentially examples of your documentation style projects. You've got some long-term investigative projects as well. You've got your British School in Rome there, and we will essentially talk about your Great Pompeii project and your Herculaneum Conservation project in future lessons. Now, these projects are not just focused on excavation, but they actually can still bring new discoveries as well, even though that's not what you're focusing on. Okay, so a lot of our kind of shifts in archaeology now, they're more conservation based as opposed to and restoration based as opposed to excavation based. Now I'm going to be hitting you with a few different new research and changing interpretations. Okay, so here's some new research and changing interpretations. I'm quickly going to run you through those now, so bear with me. For the population size, the idea of that essentially is it was originally thought that you could estimate the number of people who occupied a house and try and calculate the population of Pompeii that way. But this has been argued against, and a name that you should probably try and remember from here and burn into your brain is Andrew Wallace Hadrill. He's a pretty important historian working, and he essentially proves it wrong, that you can't just calculate all of Pompeii population just by the households. In terms of the socioeconomic status, that's essentially it was once believed that by looking at a house in Pompeii, you could, and the decorations, you could essentially, concretely tell about the social status of the owner. Once again, Andrew Wallace Hadrill doesn't necessarily argues against that and says, well, no, that's not an exact kind of, it's not an exact measure of the socioeconomic status of the population. Socioeconomic status is what kind of class are they, how wealthy are they, where do they sit in society. So were Pompeii and Herculaneum trading cities? Where are my notes for that? So earlier studies kind of looked at Pompeii as a bit of a trading city, and that Pompeii got most of the wealth from trading externally. But now that view is also questioned and argued, and it's more likely. Well, some people argue that Pompeii was more likely a consumer city, which essentially means the wealthy elite, bought the manufactured goods and the agricultural products rather than necessarily trading them. So it was more of a self-sufficient kind of economy, is essentially what that means. Okay. In terms of, was the eruption a surprise? Again, it was once thought that the eruption really took everyone by surprise, but this has been argued, in fact, by an Australian archaeologist who argues that the people of Pompeii were aware of the eruption, and the rich and the wealthy had potentially, the really rich and the wealthy had potentially got away. Okay, and we can talk about the evidence for that in a future class. All right, so I'll try and go through these nice and quick. So we've spoken about the causes of death, what people used to believe they died from in terms of in Pompeii, being caught under the roofs of the houses that collapsed from the pumice. But this is argued by people like your Harold R. Sigurdsson, your Sarah Beisel, and Estelle Laser, and they essentially help change our causes of death in Pompeii, which is obviously your asphyxiation and your thermal shock. And obviously that people actually did die in Herculaneum when it was originally thought that they escaped. Okay, then you've got your health. It was originally thought the bodies that we did have for Pompeii were essentially you're old, you're sick, the people that were too weak or old to get away. But Estelle Laser, our Australian archaeologist, challenges these ideas with the remains, and she kind of proves that what remains we actually do have are actually a pretty good cross-section of both cities. And Sarah Beisel and Luigi Capasso do the same with the skeletons from Herculaneum, and that the health actually isn't too bad in both of those cities. Now, the decline of Pompeii, it was suggested by Mayuri that after the earthquake 10 years prior, Pompeii was in a bit of a decline. So it was thought that a lot of our upper classes and our rich were leaving Pompeii, and they were going and living in their villas or their estates elsewhere outside of the city walls, which then, kind of not made Pompeii a slum, but made Pompeii, more of a lower class kind of city. And we can go over the evidence for that. But this is later eventually argued by Alison Cooley, who actually felt that she had found evidence of urban renewal rather than urban decline. And the last one, the Philodemus Project, super quick, that we find some written sources in Greek and some new knowledge and writings in how common Greek was. So we've got some examples here of some new technologies that are used for various reasons. It's probably a good idea to try and remember some of these and what they're used for, okay? And I can leave this slide here. I'm not going to read it all out for you. Again, things like your CT scans really helps kind of get a really good look at our human and animal remains. Okay, so that is the last slide. I do recommend you have a little look at these. Remember, this is only a summary. We're going to go over some of our bits and pieces of evidence in class.